The story is about a 16-year-old girl who lives in a city that is divided into 5 factions based on qualities, each being crucial in supporting the city. On her 16th year, she's permitted to take a test to determine her quality and ultimately what faction she'll choose: smart, erudite, honest, candor, brave, dauntless, selfless, abnegation, or kind, amity. On this test, however, instead of receiving 1 result, she receives 3, and her test comes back inconclusive, an extremely dangerous result called divergent. Through the rest of the novel, she'll have to make a choice of her new faction and fight to fit in. The book I chose today was the 2011 New York Times bestseller Divergent. I decided to pick this book for my book report due to my favorite movie, Divergent, having been based on it. I chose it for nostalgic purposes, and it ended up being very entertaining and an interesting read. Contrary to the movie, the book allowed me to imagine my favorite scenes with more detail and insight to what happened. Most of the scenes were the same, but there was a few tweaks that didn't really impact the storyline and aren't worth noting. I find the impact of the movie much greater simply because of the fact that I've outgrown the characters and plot and can't relate to the main characters as much in the book. However, while my issues become different and I grow up, while the book remains directed to a certain age group, the moral of self-discovery and understanding the greatness of standing out can still hold up and be applied to my life. There are 5 factions in the city of Chicago: abnegation the selfless, erudite the intelligent, candor the honest, amity the kind, and dauntless the brave. When a person is 16, they take an aptitude test to get sorted into one of the 5 factions. Beatrice and Caleb, 2 abnegations, of whom are taking the test today. However, instead of receiving 1 result, Beatrice receives 3, abnegation, dauntless, and erudite, making her divergent, an extremely dangerous label. There is then a choosing ceremony where they will choose their new faction. Caleb picks erudite and Tris dauntless. Erudite and abnegation, however, have a lot of tension between them, the leader of erudite, Janine, calling out abnegation's leader and their government for violence against his son, Tobias. And Caleb's choice is seen as a betrayal, furthering the perpetuation of this idea, that abnegation children needing an escape. Caleb and erudite, and Beatrice and dauntless. The dauntless are loud and free compared to the muted and humble abnegation. To even enter the compound, they must jump on trains, to platforms, and finally inside the building. Beatrice jumps first, and changes her name to Tris. 4 of them takes her, and the other transfers to the compound, and after the first day, Al and Tris cry themselves to sleep. Then there are fights the next day. Christina surrenders and is faced with consequences given by Eric. Tris fights Peter and loses, and gets picked on for being abnegation. 4 helps her with her fighting. Then the dauntless go on a field trip of Capture the Flag. 4 and Eric are team leaders, which 4 picks Tris, and they climb the Ferris wheel together to find the flag. Christina captures it, and Tris bonds with some of the dauntless born. Then they throw knives. Tris is skilled, but Al continues to struggle, and is forced to stand in front of the target. Tris, however, speaks up and takes his place. 4 throws knives at her, and is angered by her actions. Peter, Molly, and Drew continue to target and taunt Tris about the allegations directed to abnegation from erudite, and Tris gets back at Molly in a fight. Visiting day approaches, and Tris's mom warns her about her diversion and the second stage of dauntless training, where the leaders will be able to tell, as well as demand her to contact Caleb regarding a simulation serum to research. From that day, she learns her mom was dauntless, and 4 is a transfer based on his mannerisms. Tris then finds Al hidden away, embarrassed by his progress in dauntless, and then he admits feelings for her, which she rejects him. The ranks come in, and Edward is first, but Peter stabs him in the eye, who is now first, and Edward and Maya are factionless. Tris then hangs out with the dauntless, making her transfer friends Christina, Will, and Al jealous. The dauntless begin stage 2 of training and use simulations to face their fears, and 4 notices she's divergent and instead helps her. Then she gets tattoos with Christina. The tattoo artist Tori telling about her brother's death because of his divergence, and 4 shows interest in her. Tris is then ranked first for stage 2, which upsets Peter, who along with Drew and Al attack her by hanging her over the child and groping her, of which 4 comes to her rescue, lending her his room. She then tells her friends, and they are all shocked by Al. Then stage 3 of training begins, where the dauntless go into the fear landscapes and are presented like simulations, but they are aware they're in a simulation. Al then tries to apologize, but Tris is still filled with hatred towards him, and he commits suicide. Eric then compliments the bravery of this, which offends Tris. Her and 4 go into his fear landscape, and she learns about his fear being his dad and the allegations being true, and his name is Tobias, and his father Marcus. He reveals his aptitude test was abnegation, and he transferred to escape his father. They understand each other in the sense that they are both misfits and dauntless. The next day, Tris goes to erudite to find answers regarding the simulation serum, and continues to worry whether Janine might be planning a revolution. While she's there, she encounters Janine, who interrogates her regarding her aptitude test, and returns to Eric, interrogating her on her departure, which they blame on 4 rejecting her romantic advances. After stage 3, the dauntless are official members, and Eric injects them with a tracking device from Janine. She wakes everyone induced in a trance, where they leave for abnegation. 4 and Tris are awake, and try and blend in, confirming his divergence. Eric discovers them, and Janine puts more of a developed serum on 4 to control him, and Triss is sent to be killed, while the Dauntless shoot at the abnegation against their will. Just as Triss is about to die, her mother saves her, but then she dies in the process, as well as Will, whom Triss shoots at first. Then she finds Marcus, Caleb, and her father, who all follow her lead in finding 4 to stop the simulation in the computer program at Dauntless. She finds Peter at the entrance, who is not in a trance, and shoots at her, but she overpowers him, forcing him to help her locate the program. Triss and her father head to the controls, but her father dies, sacrificing himself. She then finds 4 in a trance, who aims at her. They then fight, but she decides instead to give him the gun, aim at herself, and embrace him, which wakes him up. 4 stops the simulation, and the Dauntless go into havoc. Triss apologizes for bringing along Marcus, and worries about Christina finding out she killed Will. They then end up taking a train to Amity. 4 and Triss kiss, and she realizes they are factionless now, and wonders what's to become of them. The book's overall theme is identity and its complexity, and bravery in relation to selflessness, facing your fears, being different, hierarchy and control, and dealing with guilt. The writing style is fast-paced, and the genre is dystopian, young adult fiction, and sci-fi. Characters. The protagonist of the story is Beatrice Pryor. She's 16 years old, abnegation-born, dauntless transfer, divergent, abnegation, erudite, and dauntless. The conflicts are character versus character, fighting Janine on hiding her divergence, taking off the simulation on the dauntless, character versus self, fitting in with the dauntless, with her friends, and being comfortable with 4, dealing with guilt about suicide, the betrayal of her brother, and not being able to save her parents, and shooting and killing at will, and fighting her fears in the simulation. She represents us. She inspires us that you can be powerful despite people's assumptions of you, so her being abnegation and still being one of the most powerful dauntless. How we have trouble fitting in anywhere, but once you find the right people, like the Dauntless Born, her transfer friends, and 4, you'll feel accepted, and allow experiences, and leaving your comfort zone is important to truly shining. Caleb Pryor is her brother and side character. He's 16 years old, abnegation-born, erudite transfer, and erudite. He has green eyes and dark hair. His conflicts are character versus self, so being selfish and choosing your interests when you know you're wrong. Character versus society, questioning his loyalties, even though his biases, so Andrew or Janine, which is erudite or abnegation. He represents our uncertainties on authority and power, and being manipulated, and how someone may not be a bad person, but once they're suscepted into bad ideals, they can be extremely bad. Questioning your beliefs and choosing love over desires, so choosing your family over what he wanted. 4, or Tobias Eaton. He's the love interest of the story. He's 18 years old. He has dark blue eyes and dark hair. He's abnegation-born, dauntless transfer, and divergent. His conflicts are character versus character, so Marcus beating Tobias, Eric competing for power with him, and character versus self, resisting Janine's control and acknowledging Triss. He represents wanting to escape your demons, no matter how strong or powerful you get, that they'll always follow you. When he escapes Marcus, Eric is there. And when he escapes Eric and Janine, Marcus is there at the end of the story on the train. Janine Matthews is the antagonist of the story. She's 45 years old, blonde and gray eyes, erudite-born and erudite. Her conflicts are character versus character, so her love for Andrew leading to her wanting revenge against Natalie by taking her son and hunting her daughter down for being divergent. Character versus self, so wanting power over Natalie and her daughter and seeing them as competition for Angie's love. Wanting power over all the factions and seeing her supremacy. Character versus society, wanting power over abnegation due to her disregard for them as useful and Andrew transferring there with Natalie. She represents our thirst to be more powerful and for attention and being able to disregard bad things out of pain and jealousy and disregard people like children dying that we don't help because they don't benefit us or the things we believe in like our values. The relationship between the head and the heart. Al is 16 years old, he's large and broad, he's Candor-born and dauntless transfer, and he's deceased. His conflicts are character versus self, so Triss rejecting him, not fitting in, and not being good and dauntless. He represents how when you feel low, you'll do anything for power. Triss was powerful, and her rejecting him made it worse. So, attacking her gave him power over her, and he couldn't get it in Dauntless, where he was doing badly, and Triss was doing well. They both represent, Janine and Al both represent how rejection made them feel like at a loss for power, and how therefore, they went crazy after being rejected. Peter is the anti-hero of the story. He's 16 years old, Candor-born, dauntless transfer. His conflicts are character versus self, so wanting power, and to be the best in dauntless. He represents human nature, how he's morally gray, but given good influences, he can change, like when he helped Triss. Also, he shows he'll submit to anyone with power, like Eric or Triss, who threatens him, and goes after weak people, or when people are vulnerable to feel power. But he'll never be the top dog. Messages. The factionalists represent the homeless and the way that each of the factions condition people for jobs and contribute to society. But like Edward, who was stabbed, it doesn't acknowledge the disabled people and mentally unstable people who aren't able to be a product of society and leaves them to starve. Janine wanted to get rid of abnegation because, like the factionalists, they don't contribute to generalizing profits, like Candor does with law, Erudite does with science, Amity does with farming, or Dauntless does with the military. The choices of factions can represent authoritarianism and how there is only an illusion of choice, but you're not free to do what you want, and you must work under the leaders like in Dauntless, how it's not about bravery and doing what you're told. Like throwing knives, where Triss isn't respected because she took Al's place, but because she respects Eric's directions to allow knives to be thrown at her. Janine further represents this authoritarianism because she wants to take control by using the military of whom she controls as her pawns. So militarization, control, and power, plus no free will. Symbols. The serum represents the media we consume that brainwashes us, and the Divergents are immune to it and don't need media to tell them what to do. Each faction represents labels that we give ourselves in society and how they prevent us from progressing. Example, nerds won't socialize because they need to focus on studies and meet that goal. Dauntless, being located underground, symbolizes how it's evil and foreshadows it to eventually taking over abnegation. Erudite wearing glasses for vanity symbolizes how glasses help you see, but once Erudite wears them for the wrong reasons, it almost skews their perception into believing they have a better sight. Erudite's eye symbolizes and foreshadows to its manipulation and control, similar to the Illuminati. The serum can also symbolize and almost act as anti-vax propaganda of what people believe the vaccines do to us, and that the vaccinations are about controlling us to eventually take something like the serum and see how far we'll believe and trust in authorities. Candor and Amity don't make sense. Figurative language. Simile. He sounded like a strangled cat. The silence of this part of the city is eerie. It feels like a nightmare. Metaphor. When she lets her hair down at night, it hangs in waves over her shoulder. Hyperbole. My heart will burst out of my chest any minute now. Personification. The atmosphere feels hungry, like every other 16-year-old girl is trying to devour as much as he can get of his last days. Alliteration. He's plaster pale. He pushes his pains along his legs, like I do when I wipe off my sweat. About the author. Veronica Roth was born on August 19th, 1988 in New York, New York. She grew up in Barrington, Illinois, where Divergent takes place in Chicago, Illinois. She graduated in 2010 from Northwestern University with studies in creative writing. She published Divergent in 2010, and it debuted at New York Times bestseller list. It was very good timing for dystopian, as Twilight, Hunger Games were popular. More than 30 million copies have been sold by 2015. The film adaptation was released in 2014. She also has other books outside of the Divergent series called Carve the Mark, sequel, The End and Other Beginnings. Divergent and Christianity. So while Veronica was writing Divergent, she was very interested in Christianity and based it on Christian apocalypticism. So Jesus Christ will return to rapture his followers up to heaven while leaving the rest on earth with the Antichrist. Abnegation are good Christians. Everyone is selfless and modest and lead the society and help Divergent's side. Erudite are the liberal, intellectual Christian fear. They are in the pursuit of knowledge and ties down evangelical beliefs in young earth creationism. Matthews believes in knowledge, not selflessness, should rule society, and wants to attack the abnegation for this. Dauntless are a neutral force. Known to make the military and police, no one complains about the Dauntless brutality because they work under abnegation. But when taken over by Erudite, they become nothing but a drone army, except for four interests, who are former abnegations and are protected by Christian salvation. And all the Dauntless are forced to follow Erudite's order to purge abnegation from the city. Dauntless are an abstraction of war of which evangelicals believe can be just, depending on who's fighting it. She also based the story of Divergent on The Giver, which is another dystopian book. And they both talk about manipulation of restriction of divergence by government control, dystopian novels, and they depict a society where everything seems great at first, but is really an illusion. The Giver follows the life of Jonah, who lives in an organized community with a council of elders. The idea of sameness is valued. Jonah is chosen to be the next receiver of memory, where he gets all the memories from life before and pain and conflict, which no longer exist. He begins to discover a life full of color, choices, and emotions, though. Divergent is about Beatrice, who lives in a society where someone's life is based on the factions they choose. She finds out she possesses more than one of the factions, however, and hides to fit in to one, but realizes her society's flaws and why people like her threaten the system. In The Giver, the governing power enforces sameness, conformity, and has been for generations. The governing power in Divergent are the factions, and they have been raised to believe that their faction defines them. In The Giver, conformity is maintained by everyone looking the same and having the same life, not having any choices to make, and conflict and war and competition can't exist. Only The Giver and Jonah know about the past and acknowledge it and question their society. There is only one discontent with sameness, and it provides the citizens with big happiness. In Divergent, you can only live a life dictated by 5 values, and if you express more than one, you are considered dangerous and uncontrollable, and the people who don't conform to factions are in poverty. Tris seems to be the only one that questions it, and each faction benefits society, but Janine thinks otherwise about abnegation and wants to control over every faction and make them seem to use knowledge as a problem. The Giver and Divergent both depict the dangers of conformity and individuality, people who are all the same and don't question the system. The Council and Janine are ultimately control those people and manipulate them. Overall review. In my opinion, I find the story of Divergent slightly basic for my taste and age. The message came through, but I find that there are many other books that could have pulled off the dystopian genre in a more mature and in-depth way. As a story, I find it unoriginal, the factions easily coming from Harry Potter's houses, and the story of a teen girl somehow facing an entire government from the Hunger Games. There are also many flaws in the book, such as Trish's divergence and the test score of erudite when she's proven to be not very bright. Also, her character overall is extremely one-dimensional in the way that Trish has almost no personality and rather feels like a self-insert YN character. I also find the whole aptitude test quite pointless, as your character virtues shouldn't depend on whether you choose a knife or cheese. The factions seem a little childish, and the fact that having more than one virtue could make you dangerous, it seems almost impossible that everyone wouldn't be divergent. However, seeing it as an allegory to society, it could add a deeper meaning to the story, essentially a version of The Giver that makes a bit less sense. And for a story with this whole premise, promoting uniqueness, just about everything from it is borrowed. One thing I will say though, it is sure filled with nostalgia and being able to truly know the story in detail and imagine it, rather than see a cheaply made movie. I find the pace of the story is still captivating, and it always had high enjoyability. It felt as though you were with Trish, running around the field trips and experiencing the compound, and it felt as though you were learning about your relationship with Four and leaving the one with your family behind. It was very cheesy, but it was still exciting and extremely real. So yes, I recommend it, not as something to look for a message within, but as entertainment to escape your reality rather than critiquing it.